good. Because the idea is that, I'm not here to talk at you or to teach you, really. I'm here to hopefully have an interactive session. Now, we only have an hour. I should warn you, I'm typically talking about this stuff for 4 hours. It usually takes me an hour just to get my name out, So I'm going to give you a lot of information. I have some slides that I'm not wed to. Whenever we talk about this issue, who knows where it might go? And I'm not, it's not, well, save your questions till the end. And no. If you have something as we go, I want you to raise your hand. I'm not worried about that. You can get a copy of the slides. I can come back. You know where I live. So I'm not as concerned about that. What I want to talk about is what you want to talk about or what you think you need to talk about. So keep that in mind. As we go, if I say something that you agree with and you have a particular experience, a specific experience that will help illustrate that point, I hope that you will share it. Obviously we learn best through experience. If I say something that, you don't quite see it that way, or your background, your experience tells you something different, I'm hoping that you will raise your hand and talk about that as well. People call me a diversity expert. There is no expert. This is human behavior. And we're just still learning about that. We're evolving, and all of us are learning together. So I am not offended at all if your experience tells you something different than what I might say. Now, I will tell you that most of everything I talk about is based in research. When it's just what I think, I tell you this is what I think. Otherwise, it's based in research, and I try to provide references where needed. But I am going to move kind of fast through some of this. And some of this, you all are educators. Some of this stuff you already know. You're at a different point than the general population. I do talk a lot to teachers. I've talked to private schools as well as public schools. And, it's just a different group when you're talking to teachers who are educated and been thinking about this stuff. So I'm going to probably move faster than I would typically. But where I need to slow down, I hope that you remind me to slow down. So let me have you start by taking a look at this slide. You might have seen this before. Anybody seen this before? All right. Look at the white dot right there in the bridge, on the bridge of the nose. You all see that little white dot? Mm-hmm. Keep looking at that white dot. Focus on it. Really focus your gaze on it. You should be getting sleepy by now. No. Focus on that white dot.
Oh, wow.
What happened?
Mona Lisa.
Yeah. Mona Lisa? Yeah. On this page? Yeah. You recognize this is a blank page. There's no image there, but you saw Mona Lisa, huh? Look at this one. As quickly as you can, now I might be a little tough in this room, but as quickly as you can, I want you to try to describe the color you see going from the left to right, top row. Now don't read the word. Describe the color. Out loud, let's go. Red, blue, orange. Uh-oh, struggling already. Oh, wait, slow. Now you can have put you out of your misery now. But you see how we start off in a chorus. I mean, it's kind of easy in the beginning, but by the time you get to the second row, it starts to get more difficult. And we know, despite how intelligent you all are, we know that Country Day only hires the best. So we know you all are super intelligent, but you fall for the same illusion that a high school dropout falls for. I mean, a high school dropout sees Mona Lisa there. A high school dropout struggles when they're trying to do this. So much of what we do, it doesn't really relate to intellect in the way that we think of it, in the traditional sense. So much of what we do is based on something else. And we're becoming more and more sophisticated about what makes us tick. For instance, we know in this one, parts of your brain want to read the word, parts of your brain want to describe the color. So I ask you to do one or the other. You have a little bit of a battle in doing that. And we can predict that. We know that. And I didn't make this up. I just pulled optical illusions off of Google. There are thousands of them. And when I'm looking at them, I know it's an illusion, and it gets me still. Right? It has to do with human perception. And so many of the traps that we fall into as it relates to trying to understand each other is very similar. It has to do with human perception. So sometimes we see things that are not really there. Sometimes we don't see the things that are right in front of us, despite all this, immense intelligence that we have in this room. So nothing today that I talk about hopefully will, try and insult your intelligence or in any way put in question your intelligence. I'm not talking about IQ-related stuff today. I'll be talking about, again, the social and emotional intelligence aspect. So you all see where I'm going. I always start there because certainly we have some issues when we're trying to understand human differences. It's based on how we're wired. We shouldn't be surprised about that. So similar to that battle that you have when you're trying to read the word or describe the color, we have thousands of these little battles that go on within us every day. Almost every decision you make, this battle rages to some degree or another. I call it when emotion and intellect collide. Whether it's what you wear, and I also talk about nutrition. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of that today, but I talk about nutrition, and it's a perfect example of this. Let's say that you are on a diet. Not that anybody here needs to do that, but let's say that you're on a diet, and it's going to work this time. So you go to an event, and after the event, there's a reception, and there's chocolate cake. And let's say you love chocolate. This battle rages. Part of your brain says, look, it's chocolate cake, I can't have that. I'm on a diet. Forget about it. But the other part of your brain, the part of the brain responsible for emotion, what does that part of the brain say? Oh, man, I gotta have this chocolate cake. Do you see that cake? Do you smell that cake? I can have a little bit of it. And so this battle starts. And in that battle, emotions are like a bully. Get the cake, get the cake. The intellect is trying to fight it. Finally, intellect gives up. As evidenced by America's health statistics. Intellect gives up, and you end up eating the cake. However, the intellect needs to have to save face some way. So intellect says, well, I tell you what, I'm going to eat this cake. I'm going to lose this fight. But, I'll make this deal. If I eat this cake today, I won't have dessert for another 2 weeks. So you walk away and say, I made a rational decision to eat the cake. When the whole time it was an emotional decision that we rationalize. So a lot of our decisions that we think are objective decisions, oftentimes they are emotional decisions that we rationalize. And the reason that this happens to us is because we're kind of aware on the cognitive side. We're kind of aware there. But we're woefully unaware of what goes on the emotional side. Oftentimes we just can't read it, we just can't pick it up. So this battle happens. This battle happens, again, about every decision that you make. What is the fundamental purpose of any species? Survival. So we're wired. This is John Medina, who wrote Brain Rules, and then he wrote Brain Rules for Babies. And we are designed to survive. And that's one of the critical parts that emotion plays, The emotional side processes things way faster than this cognitive side, and it happens that way for our survival. Let's say right now, the lights start to flicker, the alarm, boop, alarm goes off, lights start to flicker. What do we know about our hearts? It starts to beat faster. So I'm proving that this stuff happens on the radar screen, under the radar screen, without our control. Because we don't say, oh, well, I hear the alarm going off, the lights are flashing, there must be some danger involved. Brain, please send a signal to my heart to make it beat faster so that I can have the adrenaline. It doesn't happen that way, right? It just happens. So with this emotional stuff, oftentimes things just happen. You all as teachers, you all deal with this. A kid does something and it just wasn't really a good decision. And when you ask them, well, why did you do that? What do they say? Because they don't. They don't. It's that emotional brain, and at that young age, that's mostly what they have, right? It's that emotional brain, and we're all about how old before we get the frontal lobes or prefrontal cortex, all that stuff starts to develop. How old are we? Not there quite yet. Almost 30 years old. Somewhere between 25, 30. And fellas, it takes us a longer time. The ladies get there before we do. But think about that. So, you all get them up until they're, 17, 18? They're still very, very emotional. I mean, that's what the brain, that's how we're designed to be. We're designed that way. And again, we respond to things the way we do because it's based on our survival or our perceived survival. And that's a really important distinction because sometimes it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but we perceive a threat sometimes. Any comments, questions about this? So we have been pre-wired that if it's different from me, either it could be my enemy, either it's going to eat me or I'm going to eat it. That's kind of how we're wired. And we still carry that over a little bit. And I'll prove it to you as we go. All right. Let me have you, I mentioned that this was going to be interactive. I know you all brought a notepad or a computer or something to write on. So let me have you take a moment. And I want you to write 3 to 5 characteristics that you think best capture who you are. 3 to 5 things that okay, perfect. 3 to 5 characteristics that best capture the essence of you. You take away one of these things and you're not you anymore. I mean, it's that fundamental to who you are. 3 to 5 characteristics. Everybody's attention, please. Now, I typically like to give you more time to do something like this. This is the kind of stuff, I'm hoping that we talk about a few things that'll just kind of spark your interest a little bit and make you want to go and talk about it more. It will maybe start some things that you can follow up. So you have some things to think about after I leave. So you've identified those things that are really important to you and where you think they came from. Let me tell you a little bit about my background. I'm from a city, East St. Louis, Illinois. How many people have heard of East St. Louis? All right, most people. Just this side of the room. This side don't hang out. So if you've read, a lot of educators are required, I don't know if they still do, but we're required to read Savage Inequalities by Jonathan Kozel. And that's how a lot of educators learned about East St. Louis. So that first chapter in that book was dedicated to East St. Louis. And that book came out, I think, in 91. And I graduated high school in East St. Louis in 90. And so when Kozel was there doing his research, talking about the kids in East St. Louis, I'm one of those kids. I got a chance to meet him several years ago in Jacksonville, Florida. He came to speak and had a chance to have dinner with him before his talk. And man, I'm one of the kids that you wrote about. So it was a little bit surreal. I was introduced to that book at the University of Illinois. I was an engineer, but I took a sociology class. And there's this book, so I became the science experiment for the rest of the class period. Man, did you really live there? And when I read it, I'm like, man, I guess I knew it was bad, but in reading it, it was like, wow, how did I survive? So I was writing my book back in 2007, and I went home for a funeral. And most of my family still lived there back in 2007. And I took a few pictures. And this is one of them. Welcome to East St. Louis, City of Champions. So I took these pictures because when I'm out speaking, talking about East St. Louis, people, oh yeah, I had it rough too. In my neighborhood, everybody else had Mercedes-Benzes and I had a Ford Escort, so I had it really rough. I'm like, yeah, you don't quite know what I'm talking about. So here's just some pictures, and these are not the backwoods and dark alleys. You see, there's a brand new bus stop right there. This is where people live. We had at one point the city couldn't pay the garbage collectors, so trash just piled up, on the streets. This was not unusual to see all over the streets. You see there are cars. You see the corner of the slide there. So people live on either side of this. This is not some abandoned, street that nobody lives on. This is like across the street from somebody's house. And this is not like after Katrina or something like that. This is not a natural disaster. No hurricanes in East St. Louis. This is kind of what you see on the main thoroughfares. I want you to think about, you all deal with these little minds here. Think about a child who grows up in that house, whose room might be in the back, who wakes up in the morning, bright sunny day, getting ready to go to school, and they look out the window and this is what they see. Imagine what they think about themselves and what they think about their future. Now, we just did those optical illusions, and we understand that there are some predictable things about human behavior. We can predict that a lot of kids that grow up in this situation don't think they have a future. It's very predictable, understanding how our brains process information. We grew up in the projects there, the Villa Griffin homes, the same projects that Kozel wrote about. And we moved to a house in middle school. This was a big deal, you know, moving to the house. I was like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I mean, this was a big deal. But this was our garage. This is my actual garage, how it looked back in 2007. And this is the house that we moved to. That was such a big upgrade for us. But you see next door, there's an abandoned building. So imagine the kind of things that went on in that house. In fact, in the house that you're looking at now, the house that I grew up in, there was somebody shot in that house. I was there. My teachers didn't know about that. You know, if that happened on a Saturday, go to school that Monday, my teachers don't know that somebody got shot in my house. And again, think about these emotional brains. You know, that's traumatic for anybody, but it's, you know, doubly traumatic for a young person who is still wired emotionally. But again, this was an upgrade. This was a step up for me. This is what Kozel said about kids and you all can see that? And it's something when you read those words for the first time and you realize that you're one of those kids that he's talking about. It's just it's hard for me to explain to you the feeling that you get and the responsibility that you feel for the other kids who are still in that situation. So I wrote about it. It's just something that's really important to me. So I had questions. You know, I'd go to University of Illinois, and they're like, well, how did you make it out? I don't know. I went off to Cornell to get 2 master's degrees. They're like, well, how did you make it out? I don't know. So I wanted to figure this stuff out. So I sat down, I talked about my experiences, and I really tried to look at the science of this. What do we know about how we tick, how we process information that can help us understand why we have these chronic disparities? And they go on and on and on. And to some degree, although we've seen an uptick in this stuff, to some degree, we're not in the environment where it's just pure hate. You know, that used to be the case. You know, this was just hate, you're different, I'm better than you, this is how it's going to be. That's not necessarily the case now, although we do have some element of that. So let's not forget that, you know, when you look at hate group membership, that membership has gone up recently, especially with the election of Barack Obama. So we can't deny that sentiment is out there. But that's not most people. You know, I still think it's kind of a fringe. Most people are not like, so how could this stuff keep happening? So I wanted to understand, how can this stuff keep happening without us trying to do it? And that's what my work is all about. And it led me to emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence. I was back in 95, 96 or so, reading Time magazine, and there was an article by Daniel Goldman on emotional intelligence. And when I read that, I said, man, I think this is it, you know, because when I think about some of the decisions I made and some of the decisions that other kids who were just as smart from an intellectual standpoint, the decisions that they made, there's something to this thing called emotional intelligence. So I dedicated my life to this. I went, got a doctorate degree. All my research was on emotional intelligence. My dissertation was on emotional intelligence. All my work with companies, when I ran my own business, everything I do is centered upon emotional intelligence. So too is diversity and inclusion. It starts with this whole notion of emotional intelligence. So I mentioned that I did my doctoral research on this. I did a study that looked at the relationship between emotional intelligence and intercultural sensitivity, or one's ability to understand and appreciate relevant cultural differences. I want you to guess which item mattered the most off of this page. So again, when you look at this page, I want you to look at and try and guess which item, if I have a lot of this one item, I'm probably more open to diversity, more understanding of diversity. Now, I don't want you to focus on the scale. I want you to focus on the subscales. Don't pick the whole category. Just pick one item, like self-regard or assertiveness or empathy or impulse control. Pick one item and tell the person next to you which item it is. One item. If I have this, I'm probably more open and appreciative of relevant cultural differences. One item mattered more than any other item in the study. Oh, yes. No. One item, again, it's subject.
Yeah. I was thinking these. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why it's a good question. A lot of these things don't make a lot of sense.
Like so one of these situations, like
You got horse in the race, I got mine.
there's lots of times that you're in these situations where you're like, we're thinking doing away from practice.
Okay. Did everybody make a selection? Now you got to make a selection because I don't want you coming back saying, "Oh yeah, that's the one I was thinking." Nah, you got to commit. You got to commit. All right. Since this is such a brilliant institution and such smart people, we can knock this out really, really quickly, right? First try. So I put a lot of pressure. All right. So who's got the answer? Who's got the answer? Yes, sir. Oh man, you can't start off that way. Now in the classroom with a kid, wait, oh, I don't know if I'm right. You're like, wait, you can't.
Right, I'm really sure it's my instinct was empathy in terms of
Empathy. So how many people said empathy?
Oh.
So a lot of people said empathy. Look, I did the study because of empathy. I knew empathy was a part of emotional intelligence. And if anybody's been through diversity training, the core of diversity training really is about empathy. I mean, we're trying to get you to understand. Walk a mile in my shoes. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, we all bleed red blood, right? We all want the same things in life. And, you know, we can eat. It was not empathy. It was not empathy. Next guest. We have you and then you. All right.
I think it's emotional self-awareness.
Emotional self-awareness. Why so?
Because I don't think that you can even have the other things until you have emotional self-awareness. Because if you don't understand how your emotions are coloring your perception, then I don't even know that you can develop interpersonal relationships or social responsibility or even empathy perhaps, because you might just feel stuff but not necessarily be able to interpret.
So spoken like a true educator. You know, it starts with me first. And that is certainly the advice that I would give anybody. Now, it wasn't the right answer in this case, but it's certainly advice that I would give anybody. Yes, sir.
I would say that for interpersonal relationships.
Interpersonal relationships.
I agree, you can't have interpersonal without this.
But think about that. Interpersonal relationships, that's what this is all about, right? I mean, I'm a people person. Look, I'm an HR professional, right? One of the reasons I went into HR, I'm a people person. So I connect with people. It doesn't matter that you might be a little different. I connect with, I'm a people person. We can overcome these differences, these insignificant things, right? You know by now that it wasn't an interpersonal relationship. We don't have a lot of time. We'll take one more. What's your name, sir?
Thomas?
Thomas?
Yep.
Give Thomas a round of applause because I know he's got the right.
Good winner. Good winner.
He's going to save you the fate of La Jolla Country Day School lies in your hands. Give him the right answer. Thomas, it is.
All right, my choice was optimism.
Ooh, I do give you partial credit. I do. He's close. He saved you a little bit. So optimism was statistically significant, more statistically significant than many of the other items, really than all of the other items except for one. That one was, drum roll please. Only your suspense. It was problem solving. Did anybody get problem solving? No. So I've been doing this talk ever since I wrote this book back in 10 years now. And rarely does anyone ever get problem solving. I used to bring a book with me and give it away. But I don't bring the book no more because people don't get problem solving. Why don't people get problem solving? Why do you think that is?
It's analytical.
It feels negative.
It feels a little negative?
Everything else on there is more of a positive, has a positive spin. And
Yeah.
so to me, I was like, well, maybe the problem is looking at it as a problem. So I didn't like that. It was the most negative one.
Interesting. That's interesting. Negative. That one is negative. Yes, ma'am.
I think problem solving is logical.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have to deal with people and diversity, you have to sort of go beyond just the logic of it and look at the emotional point.
Yeah, sometimes it's illogical.
Yeah,
Right.
sometimes it's illogical.
I saw some other hands. What do we think? Anybody else?
I can say because I'm an engineer. Engineers are socially antisocial.
Now what's interesting is I started off as an engineer. My junior year at Illinois, I switched over from engineering because I realized I didn't want to be behind. It wasn't my thing, but I'm still a problem solver. But I use those same engineering fundamentals to address people stuff. So when this study came out, problem solving, this was right up my alley because it's what I thought anyway. Now, I think that some people might, when you look at problem solving, you have the connotation. And oftentimes with these issues, you know, we want to be positive about it. But let's think about this. If women, I mean, a lot of my experience has been in corporate America. If women are making less for the same job that men are, and you take out all the factors that, and you still have that women are making less for the same job, is that a problem?
Yes.
Absolutely, it's a problem. If African Americans are getting employed at a lesser rate, you know, given the same resume and background, is that a problem? If an organization is not hiring Muslims because of their religion, is that a problem? Absolutely, it's a problem. Disparities that we have, they are problems. Here's what I think happens. It has to do, I think, with what you said. It's logical. It's logical. We have been, I think, programmed. When we start talking about issues of diversity, we look at them a little differently. Now, when you're trying to solve problems in this school that are operational in nature, you talk about it like this. We have to do X, Y, Z. Here's the data on it. Here's the stats. This is what we need to do. When you're talking about diversity, all of a sudden you're talking like this. Oh, well, we just need to all get along and hold hands and this and that. We get all soft skills. And what I'm saying is that hasn't worked. That's part of the equation, but we can't hold our hands our way out of these issues. We got to bring our whole brains to the task. You know, bring all of our tools to the task. If we have these issues, we got to bring the full set of skills, our whole brains to solve these issues just like any other issue. So we shouldn't have this, this touchy-feely, soft kind of, maybe this is just my old engineering side, but it's not just about the soft stuff. In fact, when I talk about soft skills, I call them a hardcore soft skill. Because things like empathy, it has to do with neuroscience, the mirror neuron system and all that. Hopefully we'll get a chance to talk a little bit about that. So problem solving was the most statistically significant in my study. And it really changes the way I do diversity stuff. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say, hold hands and just tell us your story. That's interesting, but that doesn't solve these broad issues that we have. It's not enough. Comments, questions, concerns? All right, so when you look at the things on your list, are those things a result of nature or are they a result of nurture? Those items, those 3 to 5 items. How many people say these things are primarily a result of nature? I was born this way. Nature. Ooh, yeah, you got a couple of halfway committed people, 2 or 3 people. Okay, so how many people say nurture? You know, it's all about nurture. And so most people in the room say nurture. The answer is a little bit complicated. There's like a technical answer and then there's a practical answer. From a technical standpoint, it's probably nature. However, you need nurture. You know, it has to be a combination. You know, the real answer, the practical answer is there's a combination of both. But you can't deny nature. I mean, when you look at studies of identical twins who were separated at birth, they have remarkable similarities. Remarkable. They choose the same careers. They marry the same type of people. There was one classic case of these neat freaks, you know, just OCD neat freaks. And they were in different parts of the country. And the interviewers interviewed one of them and said, hey, is this, you're very neat. Is that a result of nature or nurture? Oh, it's nurture. My parents are very neat, so I make sure that I keep my stuff tidied up. They go interview the other twin. Is this a result of nature or nurture? Oh, it's nurture. My parents are slobs. Because they're so sloppy, I keep all my stuff. And so both said it was nurture, but the truth is, it was in them. It wasn't that parental influence. And there's so many studies that talk about that. When you think about child prodigy, for instance, there are some people that already show remarkable acumen at certain things at 2, 3, 4 years old. However, think about Tiger Woods in golf. Tiger's back playing now. We'll see how he goes. But Tiger Woods in golf. If Earl Woods didn't like golf, you wouldn't know Tiger Woods. Think about Mozart composing symphonies as a little kid. If Mozart's parents didn't like music, he didn't have a piano, you wouldn't know Mozart. So it's this combination of things. And that makes me think about places like East St. Louis or pockets of San Diego, pockets of cities all across America. It may be some remarkable talent in these pockets, but there's no environment to help bring that out. Or there could be some, not so great things, and if you're in the wrong environment, maybe it brings that out. So teachers play a remarkable role in our society. Dr. Conrad and I were just talking about this a little bit when I was setting up, how, in my opinion, we don't value teachers as a country, as a country. We just don't. When you look at not just the pay, it's not just the pay, although that's an indicator, right? But it's more in who we hold in esteem. People who say I want to grow up to be teachers are oftentimes people who come from families who had teachers in the family, etc. But people, doctors, lawyers, so-and-so. It's just the most important job that one can have. We have these little ones that you're helping to shape. So absolutely, the nurture part plays into it. And so in the classroom, you got to create the kind of environment and that's why I like a smaller class size, so that I can get to know this kid, to know what nature gave you. Nature may have given you something that nature didn't give you, and I got to give you some attention to figure out what that is, and it's my job to help bring that out. So this is why we have our kids at Country Day. It's because you have the type of resources, you have the type of one-on-one attention, you have the kind of environment that hopefully we can figure out. Knock on wood, my kids are good enough to get a scholarship in something. We can figure out what those talents are, and then you can exploit those talents. You can grow them. But in environments like the one I grew up in, it's just tough. It's just tough. So I certainly, I'm in awe of what teachers do on a day-to-day basis. I got this information from a book, The Owner's Manual to the Brain. You have an owner's manual for every device you have. The most complicated machine on earth, we have no owner's manual. Well, it's out there, but people don't have it. 100 billion brain cells, and we just do it by trial and error. Well, this is what my parents did, so, it worked for me. First of all, I have to talk to the people around you to figure out if it really worked for you. That's one person's opinion. But anyway, part of what you do here is to help figure out what is there and how do we get the most of it. Now, we talked about problem solving. If you look at this chart, this is from the BLS, and it talks about education at every level. So less than high school graduate, some college bachelor's degree, and it breaks down race and ethnicity. What do you notice in this chart? These are unemployment rates, by the way. What do you notice? Women's unemployment rates are higher at every level, I think except one. African Americans and Hispanics unemployment rate are higher at every level than whites. So we talk about education being a great equalizer. This says, I did what you said I'm supposed to do. I went and got a bachelor's. I even got an advanced degree. I still have a higher unemployment rate. So it's not just about education. Education is a necessary but not sufficient condition to try and close some of these chronic gaps that we have. So what I'm trying to figure out is, what explains this? I don't believe that it's somebody saying, look, that's a woman, I've got to pay her less. That's a black person, I don't want to hire them because they're black. I just don't believe that most people are making that calculation. I believe it's something else. It's something else. When you think about confirmation bias, there's so many studies that talk about, you take a little white kid and a little black kid, typically males, for the same thing, the same infraction, the little black kid is more likely to get sent home or sent home for a longer time. I mean, there's several studies. I don't know, have you all seen that data? And so is it that teachers are saying, I don't like little black kids, so I'm gonna get them out of my classroom? I don't think that's what's going on. It's deeper than that. It's deeper than that. So that's what we'll talk about. What are these root causes? Here's what I think is going on in society. And by the way, oftentimes we want to jump to what's happening in the classroom, and that's important. But we forget that the classroom is just a microcosm of society. If we don't understand these broad issues, we can't hope to understand what's going on in the classroom because the kids bring that stuff in the classroom. We bring that stuff in the classroom. So from a broader society standpoint, what's going on? So we have these adverse outcomes resulting from conscious bias. You know, this is just flat out discrimination. Some of that still goes on. Have all kind of research in my book. You can look up any aspect of quality of life in America. You can see studies that show that there is still, you know, some outright discrimination that goes on. Some of it. Again, I think a whole lot of this is a result of the unconscious stuff, the implicit stuff, the stuff that we didn't even know it. We didn't try to do it. When you film somebody in the classroom, in a technical field, like a science and engineering, and they're calling on all the little boys to answer the questions, and the little girls raising their hand, they don't even call them. And when you show a teacher that, they're like, oh my God, I didn't know I was doing that. And they did. They did. Here's the part that people miss. Here's the part that people miss. The psychological impact of conscious and unconscious bias. People self-select. So when I got accepted to Cornell University, I'm so excited. I run home, I burst in the door, I tell my mother, and, you know, I'm going to Cornell. It's the #1 school in the country for human resources management, what I'm going to study. I couldn't go to a place in the country better than this. I'm so excited. My brother yells upstairs, look, just because you're going to Cornell doesn't mean those white folks are going to give you a job when you come out. I'm not going to tell you what I said back down. I hadn't read all about emotional intelligence then. But I was so angry at him. And it was years later before I didn't never agree with him, but it was years later before I at least understood where he was coming from. He was dealing with this. He had seen a lot of people go off and try to make it, and they didn't make it. So it was kind of rational for him to think, look, people go and they don't make it, so it's going to happen to you too. It's actually irrational in an environment like that to think that you can make it. Everybody doesn't make it. Most people don't make it. It's almost irrational to think that you can make it. So there's a psychological impact of this. Seeing somebody get shot in your house, what's the difference seeing somebody get shot in the house in East St. Louis than a soldier seeing somebody get shot in a war zone? What's the difference? When you witness violence, you're likely to get post-traumatic stress. We know the outcome of post-traumatic stress. What do you think a kid in the classroom is going to do if they're experiencing post-traumatic stress? How are they going to focus? How are they going to pay attention? This happens. So when you add all these things together, you have these chronic disparities. The stuff that people are trying to do, the stuff that happens that they're not trying to do, and I'm self-selecting out because I see all this stuff happen. Why try? The combination of all that is deadly. Deadly. And it has this impact. Sometimes I'm criticized for people of color for even acknowledging this. You know, well, you're blaming the victim. I'm not blaming the victim. I'm acknowledging reality, that chronic stress has an impact. It has an impact. And sometimes you don't even know what that impact is. So I'm still thinking about neuroscience. From a neuroscience standpoint, why do we stereotype? How many people here stereotype, by the way? How many people here stereotype? So whenever I ask that question, somebody says, we all do. Because we'll admit to it, but we're going to throw somebody else in it. Yeah, I know, but yeah, everybody here does that. Nobody answers that question now other questions people don't answer for everybody, but for that question, you answer for everybody. Yeah, we all do. Of course we do. Our brains are trying to work as efficiently as they possibly can. That's what we are designed to do. We're designed to come up with shortcuts so we can process things. I mean, again, we have 100 billion brain cells, but there's so much stimuli out there. If we had to focus on everything, we just couldn't survive. So I never used this particular clicker before I came, right? Mine is not working. But guess what? I can use it. My brain has a box for it. My brain has a box for this pen. I don't have to lick it and try and figure out what it is. Like, I get up, I can write with it. We make these boxes. We make these shortcuts every day. If we make shortcuts for phones and clickers and pen, doesn't it follow that we can make those shortcuts when we see people? Absolutely. Brain, where do I notice? What do I notice? What box do I put it in? So we end up stereotyping. But what's the difference between a person and something like this, a clicker? What's the main difference? Why is stereotyping or generalizing fine for this, but not for people? The main reason. Yes?
Bigger difference between appearances and what is going on
Yeah. So appearance might tell us one thing, but we don't. This was produced on a line, assembly line, right? It was produced to exact specifications. It better do, when I hit that button, it should do what it's supposed to do, or I'm going to send it back, right? People are not that way. People are not that way. We have all these different characteristics. We don't have just one characteristic. What we see is just a reflection of one of the things, one of the many things. It's the visible diversity, but there's all this inherent stuff, this internal stuff. So that's why we can't. Otherwise, we'd be able to do it with people. But, you know, what you see on the outside doesn't always match what's on the inside. There's too many different things on the inside. So we're not made to specification. But for me, I don't get angry when I see somebody stereotype. I mean, it's a natural process. What I try to do is help them understand why they're doing it and how you can trick that brain mechanism to keep from doing it. And the fact of the matter is, we're tribal. We are tribal. We're tribal. We go back to that reptilian brain in many ways. And shared experiences, they have such power over us. Let's say that you all like to travel internationally. Anybody like to go out of the country? Let's say you're out in Paris, and you're at a little restaurant in Paris, and you're the only American, you know, in there. You're having a wonderful time. You're eating. Everybody's speaking French around you. Music is playing. Everything is great. And then somebody walks in, you know, speaking English. You turn around, and they have a San Diego sweatshirt on. What do? You run and talk to them. You know, hey, you're from San Diego. Now, it doesn't matter what race they are, what religion they are. At that moment, y'all have that connection, right? You connected because they have that San Diego shirt on. We feel this desire. We got to say something. Look, when I see somebody with a St. Louis Cardinal hat on, I make eye contact with them. You know, I say something. When I lived in Dublin, Ireland, for 6 months when I worked for Citibank. Wonderful experience, by the way. And my mother said, you sure you want to go? They don't have any black people in Dublin. You sure you want? And she didn't lie. They really didn't. But every once in a while, you'd see somebody black. And we'd be going down the street, my wife and I, and there'd be in another street, or, you know, we could see somebody black. And guess what we do? Hey man, hey, where you from? What you doing here? Does that mean that I had something against all those Irish people? No. The Americans had a bar they would go to. It was the American bar. That's where they would go, and that's where they would drink. Does that mean they had something against those Irish people? It's this longing to connect with someone who has a shared experience. It's this longing to connect with them. That's how we're designed. What's the best evidence that we have a shared experience? The best evidence is what we see, because it's the first thing. Before I have a chance to talk with you, to find out what we share, I see you. And that subconscious brain, that emotional brain is already making judgments. It's already trying to figure you out. What do I know this from? Before we've even said anything. And so people, I don't want to talk about race and gender and all. That stuff is important because it's what we see. And those mechanisms already start. Now, certainly the internal stuff is important. You know, personality style, introvert versus, all those are really important aspects of diversity, but we don't see those first. And so our brains start that mechanism based on what we see first. You all with me? Anybody disagree? We know this is true because of research around mirror neuron. Man, we're already at 415, can't be. We know this is true because research around mirror neurons. Real quickly. Let's say Colleen and Jennifer, communication first. Colleen and Jennifer. Let's say that Colleen, you and I are having a discussion. Jennifer, you're a brain expert. You're in another room. You're looking at our MRI printouts. You know, you're watching our brain scan. Colleen, you decide to tell me about something that was traumatic for you. What do you see on a brain scan, on Colleen's brain scan? You see in the limbic system, the amygdala, the area of the brain associated with stress, and you see activity. So she can tell, she's an expert, she can tell she's talking about trauma, something traumatic, because she's reliving it as she's telling me that. Fascinating stuff. What do you see when you look at my brain scan? Empathy. You see empathy, and you know it's empathy because guess what? My brain is doing the same thing. In order for me to understand it, I have to put myself there a little bit. So my brain starts to release cortisol, stress hormones, just like I have to live it, you have to relive it. That's how I understand it. That's kind of a human thing. That's how we understand each other. At least it's supposed to work that way. Doesn't necessarily work that way between Colleen and me. Why? Because we look different. There's research that suggests that across racial lines, that mirror neuron system may not work that way. How do you react to that? So people say, oh, race doesn't matter. Not according to the mirror neuron system. It absolutely matters. Of course we see it. So this one study, researchers they stuck somebody with a stick pin or a cotton swab. This was Chinese Americans and white Americans. And if you see somebody getting stuck with a stick pin, the area of your brain associated with pain will light up. And it did if you were Chinese watching somebody Chinese get stuck with a stick pin. It did not if you were Chinese watching somebody white get stuck with a stick pin. It lit up if you were white watching somebody white get stuck with a stick pin. It didn't light up if you were white watching somebody Chinese get stuck with a stick pin.
Can I quickly just ask,
Sure.
what about gender?
This study didn't look at, and I need to go back to see some gender differences. This was specifically talking about racial differences. Now that's fascinating when you think about it, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating. But then again, it's not, based on what I just said. We are designed for shared experiences. What's like me? What's like me? Is it like me? Is it like me? And the first indication that we have is what we see. What is the one condition? What needs to be present in order for my brain to go ahead and light up the way it should if Colleen is telling me about trauma? What needs to be present between the two of us? Trust. And how do you gain that? Through dialogue, through experience. If I know her and I know that we share other things, I might know a little bit about your family. We might share, I'm past that visual part once I get to know you. That's the big learning here. You can be a kind person, well-meaning person, just as sweet as you can be. But if you don't have experiences that are broad, you leave yourself wide open to that brain mechanism. You leave yourself vulnerable to that brain mechanism that will allow you to stereotype or generalize because you don't have that experience. Once you have experiences across these differences, that retrains the brain. And you recognize that you have these things in common, and you do share some things. This is all about relationships. This is all about relationships. We struggle with empathy because we don't have those experiences. If we know one Muslim, and that's the only one we know, if we meet another Muslim 2 years from now, we're going to put them together. The only thing they might have in common is Islam. Maybe different as night and day. But what if I knew 200 Muslims? It'd be very, very difficult for me to generalize because I know there's so much diversity within that group. This is all about experiences. This is all about experiences. And the problem is we don't get those experiences. This is kind of a heat map. I guess not a heat map, but it shows race, clusters of race in the United States. So where you see that dark area, these are clusters of white, and the little green areas are clusters of African American and Hispanic. We're very segregated. We're still very segregated in this country. And it's still with the young people. People 18 to 34 say, most of the people I spend time with are just like me. So we're leaving our brains very vulnerable, very vulnerable. So I don't have time to really go through this model, but we all should follow the normal curve. Whether you're talking about men or women or Hispanic people or non-Hispanics, all of us follow this normal curve, right? Some people are exceptional, some people are average, some people are below average. I happen to think that most people are average. What do y'all think? That always catches some people, by the way. That's the definition of average. But that's not what the outcomes are. And so why are the outcomes different? Well, when you think about the barriers, if I'm interviewing someone and we're like each other, am I likely to make a decision in your favor or not? If you answer the questions the way I answer them, I'm probably going to hire you. We're alike. So I can talk about introvert versus extrovert. If you got extrovert leaders, guess what? They're going to hire mostly extroverts. It's going to be hard in this organization for introverts. If you got an introvert leader, guess what? You're going to have a lot of introverts. It's going to be a little bit difficult for extroverts. This is just natural. This is just natural. So how do you get out of this? First of all, you all have to think about who's in your circle. Who do you live around? Who do you go to dinner with? If you have little kids, who do they get exposed to? Who do you spend your personal time with? You can't just do it in the classroom. It's not enough. It's not enough. We need diversity in the classroom. I'll fly through this real quick. We know that it improves learning outcomes. You'll have these, by the way. It improves empathy and understanding, better career preparation, more engaged citizens. And this is not just for the diverse folks. This is for everybody. And the achievement gap gets to be closed when there's more diversity in the classroom. So we know we need that, but not just in the classroom. We already have diversity at all levels, right? Because we have different personalities and all that stuff. But we need some visible diversity in the faculty. We need it in the board of trustees. We need it in administration. Because little kids, they start putting together the world. Look, if all the people of color work in the cafeteria or cleaning up the building, then that's what I'm probably supposed to do. So that's what I should aspire to do, either consciously or subconsciously. This is how we make sense of the world. This is how we make sense of the world. This is an important one, and I'm wrapping up, y'all. I know we're running late. But we keep talking about white people need to do this, black people need to do this, Christians need to do that, Muslims need to do that. You can't do that. There's not one monolithic group. There's not a one-size-fits-all. So people are different. If you look at this equation, people are at different levels. There are people who are misinformed about why we have these differences, and they're out there, they're trying to be proactive. They're trying to make things better for everybody, but they're misinformed, so they need to be re-educated. Look at this end. Look at this end. People who know better, they understand that there's still discrimination. They understand that we still have some work to do. But I'm calling them regressively proactive. So they want to take us back, and they're really active about that. These are the people who join hate groups and stuff, by the way. So you got all the way from this group to this group. And these are different strategies. So we got to find out, kind of where people are and what do they need individually. You just can't assume that everybody's at the same place when it comes to this stuff. Here's something that's really important. Be aware of unintended consequences. So if you have books by diverse authors, that is a wonderful thing. But if that book by the diverse author has to be about a topic related to diversity, then you've undercut yourself. It just can't be, well, why is my hair kinky? That's great, for a little kid to try and understand that, and for people that's great. But if it's always the person of color saying, well, why is my, maybe there should be a book with a little white girl saying, why is my hair straight? You know what I mean? So think about that. If you have speakers who come, don't make it always about diverse topics. Have somebody come talk about finance who's African American. We can't be relegated to these topics. Always understand the power dynamic. When you go and volunteer at a soup kitchen or whatever it is, always understand that what are people seeing? Our intent is to do something good in the world, but we may be reinforcing stereotypes in the process. Think about that. I know you all had the living library and the human library. And that's a great, I understand what they're trying to accomplish. But if you chose to talk to the person who was homeless in the human library, you haven't necessarily learned anything about homelessness. You learned about that person's experience. And that person is just a data point. That person cannot inform you about homelessness in the United States. Now, if you take that as a starting point, you go and look at a documentary on homelessness. You go interview 15, now you start to but talking to one person that's in this situation, you've learned nothing. That's a data point. Who are our math people here? A data point could be an outlier. And what do we do with outliers? What do we do with outliers in real life? We latch on to them. So this is what politicians do. Oh, it's wonderful to be here in La Jolla. This is a wonderful place. This is a wonderful place. The American dream is alive and well in La Jolla, California. You take Miss Cross here. Miss Cross came over here. Her great-grandparents were immigrants. They came to this country with a nickel in their pocket, just a nickel. And you see how successful Miss Cross is. They own half of La Jolla. They've been very, very successful. This proves that all you have to do is work hard in America, and you too can have your piece of the American dream. What did they leave out? When Miss Cross's great-grandparents came over with a nickel, there were 300 other families with a nickel. Guess what? They still have a nickel. So do we draw our conclusions from this one experience or the 300 experiences? This experience is an outlier. It feels good emotionally, but it doesn't inform us. We can't make policy decisions based on that. So when people say, well, Jarik, you came from East St. Louis, that proves we don't need all these programs. You just got to work hard. You work hard, they can work hard just like you. I was an outlier by definition. Most people are still there. You can't learn a whole lot from me. It's an interesting thing, but you need to talk to a whole lot of people like me. Better yet, talk to a lot of the people that are still there and figure out why they're there. I promise I'm wrapping up. I think this is my only couple slides and I'm done. But you all get my point here? So you might have good intentions, and that is terrific. But be really aware of unintended consequences. We may be reinforcing some of the stereotypes that we're trying to break. Now, is this ball coming out at you, or is it going in the page?
Out.
Obviously. Let me have you come up here. Come up here. This is so obvious. What's your name?
Chris.
Chris. All right, Chris. Now, Chris, bring your hand across one of those lines. Is that a straight line or a curved line?
It's a straight line.
Therefore, there are no curves in this diagram at all. There is no ball there. It's the little squares in the corners of the big squares that give you the illusion that there's a circle there. I got you again. Just keep in mind that when you're dealing with these issues, again, sometimes we don't see the things that are right in front of us. Sometimes we make up things that are just not there at all. And it's not because we don't have good intentions. It is because of how we're wired. And we're wired to fall into these traps that we find ourselves in all the time. What emotional intelligence helps you do, though, it helps you sometimes be proactive to avoid those traps. And at the least, it helps you understand when you're in one of those traps and gives you some tools to dig your way out. So thank you all again for having me here. That's it. I'm sorry I'm cutting this As you might imagine, there are like 30 other things that I love to talk with you all about. But at least I wanted to give you an introduction to help you think through this stuff and understand that give yourself a break. If you kind of say the thing, I didn't mean to say it this way. We're human beings. I do this for a living. Every time I talk about this stuff, I take a risk that I could insult somebody, but I have to take that risk. Because if I don't take that risk, we can never get anywhere. And what I'm trying to do is build a relationship with people so that they know that if I say something that maybe not right in their eyes, if they know I care about them, they give me the benefit of the doubt. If we have a lousy relationship and I say something that could be, they're going to take it the other way. So it's really all about those relationships to create that kind of that war chest that you might need in case something goes wrong. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. It goes without saying, we sincerely appreciate that you spent the time with us. I know that I can say we learned a lot from you. I know that we need to be compassionate, we need to be proactive problem solvers, but most importantly, we need to listen to understand. And so thank you for that. And we have a book for you, and I don't have it right now, so I'm going to walk you out, and then I'll give it to you.